Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, March 1st. Rabbit, Rabbit.
Yes, Rabbit, Rabbit.
2020.
Okay. Beginning of a new month. Yeah. And
beautiful day today.
Yes, beautiful day today.
Of course, I'm exhausted.
Yes, because you were teaching. You were meeting with your class at the Princeton Museum, showing them the treasures that are there. And how'd that go?
Well, fine, but it's I talked for a long time.
All right,
so, I'm pooped. So you will have to bear the burden.
As is not unusual, as one does. So in any event, so taking that responsibility seriously, I will begin by describing our first outing this week, which was the theater. The theater. On Thursday, we went to a production of 72 Miles to Go, a Roundabout Theater Company show at the Pell's Auditorium. And 72 Miles to Go is a play by Hilary Bettis. And it's kind of it is a serious play about a family which is separated almost the entire play because while the majority of the family is living, the two sons and a daughter and the husband are living in Arizona. The mother is separated from them because she is in Mexico because of immigration issues. The story is that she met her husband trying to escape from Mexico into the U.S. and enter the U.S. illegally. She had a son with her at the time. They had two additional children. Then she was discovered by the authorities and sent back to Mexico. And the story unfolds from there. And different things happen that make it identify really and describe and elaborate on the challenges met by a family of that sort. And it's a sad story. Fair enough?
Right. But it's not... Immigration and the difficulties of immigration is sort of the framework. But the real story is about family relationships, wouldn't you say? Yeah,
well, it's about family relationships set against that background. I mean, she's.
But it's not like you go in there and you're just looking for a resolution, or you're just
But the conversations that go on are among the five main characters include four people live on stage and one on the telephone, and that's her in Mexico. So it's always there. Look, it's. We liked it. I think you liked it even more than I did, frankly. I mean,
I was thoroughly engaged.
Okay.
And I didn't find it overwhelmingly political, even though it's a political issue. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It wasn't trying to be too didactic. Mm-hmm. It was just sort of telling the story of this family. Yeah. Everybody's got their story. This is their story. And it was pretty heartrending. But it also had just human touches. All the things a family with, teenage, young adult kids go through.
Yeah. No, they're real people. They're real people.
Social issues, school issues, job issues.
Well, I agree with that.
Holiday issues.
I agree with that. And the cast, I thought, was... Well, there were a couple of standouts. The standout to me was a fellow named Trini Sandoval, who plays the father. I thought he was tremendously effective. I mean, easy to connect to. He just seemed to leap across the stage and sort of draw you in, and I think that helped quite a bit. It's hard to evaluate the cast otherwise. Frankly, I thought a couple of parts were really underwritten, or I thought it could have used about 6 months more in workshop, honestly. But on the political point, I think you're absolutely right. And in part, it's a little less political because it's not like it's a screed about the existing administration and what ought to be done now. The entire play takes place during the Obama administration. It says 8 years from 2008 to 2016. So it's dealing with an immigration backdrop that's of long standing. And frankly, given the circumstances of this family, it's almost hard to imagine any law on the horizon that would change. And I don't want to go into the circumstances precisely, but they are kind of a hard case. So it's not like they're saying, oh, gee, the current administration is oppressive. That's not the point of the play, although I'm sure that's the way the Times will review it. The interesting thing, too, by total coincidence, this week in the paper, just a couple days after we saw it, there were 2 articles about Mexican immigration. And they were actually very hopeful from if you're thinking about the plight of a family in these circumstances. And I'll tell you why. The first was that headline, Mexicans lead exodus of undocumented immigrants from U.S. And the point of it there is that there has been real improvement in the Mexican economy, such that a lot of Mexicans who were undocumented, who came into the U.S., are leaving the U.S. and going back to Mexico because of the economic opportunity there. And they actually show a picture of a woman who employed undocumented Mexicans who was chagrined by losing her best workers. That's point 1. And point 2 is, headline just above it, we are desperate for more immigrants, a top Trump aide says. And you say to yourself, well, let me read that again. And it's Mick Mulvaney who goes on. He says, we are desperate for more immigrants, for more people. And the article talks about how much immigrants add to the American economy. Now, there is a classic case of what I'll call lower wage immigrants. They talk about mushroom picking in Pennsylvania. And they say that that's hard physical work, but it pays actually quite well. And they can't find enough American workers who are willing to engage in that kind of work and make real money. And a lot of the crop has gone unpicked, apparently. That's how desperate they are. But it also is in what I'll call higher wage situations. They say what fuels the economy in many ways is the influx of immigrants. And this is the Trump administration talking. So why am I talking about this? Because what's going to change the law and change the landscape is the placing of value on the contributions of Mexicans, immigrants in the Mexican economy and the U.S. economy. Once that's established, then the laws will change.
Okay.
So I thought that was all very hopeful. In any event, so I would say, I mean, you enjoyed it. I thought it was worth seeing. So we would recommend that. And that hasn't formally opened yet and hasn't been reviewed yet. And that's at Roundabout.
Right.
And then on Saturday, we went out again because that's the kind of folks we are. And we went to our very much increasingly cherished Music Mountain Theater.
Yes, local theater.
Local theater. We had talked about that before, just a few weeks ago.
Lambertville, NJ.
Right, and we saw A Christmas Carol there, sort of, and
our eyes were opened.
Right, it was a nice production of a not very often performed musical version of Christmas Carol. And this was a little different because we went to see Into the Woods. Now, Into the Woods is a classic Sondheim musical, and it's pretty serious business. And it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long. It is not a light undertaking. And I went in thinking, well, maybe they'll abridge it. How they can't possibly perform the whole thing. Maybe they'll cut out some songs. I don't know how they're going to do it. A lot of
productions just cover the first act.
That's right. Well, particularly student productions, and because it's quite complicated, and frankly, it's a lot of work to get up to speed to do that. They performed the whole thing. And again, this is, I don't know what the right term is, community theater, regional theater. It's hard to describe. It's really as much a school as much as anything else when you get on their website. And they teach dance and they teach theater and the like. But the performers are adults. They're not students in the sense that they're high school students. And they're talented. These people can really sing. There's no question. But above all else, they can really sing. But what's the miracle is that they can put together a production like this with, creative sets, let's call it that way, and canned music. They obviously not only license the play itself, but they license sort of a musical backdrop, soundscape that they perform against. But they do extremely well, and I enjoyed it a great deal.
Yes. And we went with Dixon and Mark.
Right.
We love to go to theater and stuff with Dixon and Mark. Because A, Dixon is so enthusiastic, and B, Mark always knows inside stuff.
Not as much as we hoped, but some.
Oh, he came through later.
He identified a couple people in the cast.
Well, he knows a little bit of gossip and so on. Anyway, it was fun. I like the small town feel of it.
Yeah.
As well, and there was a lot of family cheering in the audience for certain characters. And then, when you get there, the
artistic director.
The artistic director.
She greets you.
They call her the producing director, Ginny Brennan.
Right.
Gives a little speech to the whole audience and encourages people to be involved.
Let's give a sense of the scale of this. It's a nice little auditorium, and it's very hard to estimate crowds. So, but I would say let's say there were 75 people there. So what they do is, and this to me is almost a miracle because again, I don't want to lose this point. It was good. Mm-hmm. Okay, not only was it good, it was moving at the end. Okay, now look. Part of what you're seeing is, and now I'm increasingly convinced that Into the Woods is really a masterpiece. I mean, the lyrics are unbelievably, they're brilliant.
It's Sondheim, Sondheim.
Yeah, but if you saw the movie, when I saw the movie, I didn't get it. But it was really startling, and startling to me because they're getting, let's say, and I'm estimating here, they're only going to perform it, we understand, for 3 weekends, okay? Let's say they average, and this is a fair estimate, might be high, might be low. 100 people in the audience every performance, let's say. And let's say every...
No, they're going to have more than that.
All right, well, you make it higher. I don't know. But the point is they're doing 5 performances a weekend. Again, that's a little bit of a guess, but I think that's right. And if it's 3 weekends and if it's 15 performances, let me use 100 just because the math is easy, but we'll call that...
I don't think it's 100.
What do you think it is?
I think it's more than that.
150?
200.
Tamsen, we had 75 people there. You can't average 200, okay? So... Call it...
all right, move on. Okay.
Here's my point. Here's the math, all right? If it's 100 people, it's 1,500 people see it in total, okay? Trust me, I did the math, all right? Now, maybe that's a little low, but here's my point. A Broadway theater holds 1,200 people, all right? So it is pretty close to doing all this work to perform it once, all right? If it was a Broadway house. That's how... It seems crazy to me. It's all disproportionate. It's an enormous amount of work just to perform it to the equivalent of 1 or 2 Broadway performances. And of course, the beneficiaries are people like you and me. So to me, it's amazing. And what's also further amazing is that they have this full schedule of 16 shows through the year. They're doing the last 5 years in a few weeks. They're doing Matilda, which is a big lift, I think. Noise is Off, you know how big a cast that is in that farce and how it has to be timed. Legally Blonde. I'm not going to read all of them, but it's unbelievable to me. Okay. It's unbelievable. So what am I saying? I'm not saying everyone should come to Lambertville because that's too much to do. But look at what kind of theaters you have in your area. I mean, to me, it's been eye-opening. Eye-opening.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead.
And thank you for doing the math.
Yes.
Lord knows I wasn't going to do it.
No problem.
All right, so anyway, so we've been having fun, seeing some plays and theater, and there's a lot. The New York Times, actually, the arts and leisure section of the New York Times this week was pretty much all about what's coming up.
Yeah,
it was kind of their spring preview theater issue, and there's a lot of stuff to look forward to. I know we're going to Caroline and Change soon.
So Caroline and Change is a musical I've been sort of aware of, but not highly aware of. And it's written by a woman named Jean Tesori, who recently did some research on, written a whole lot of things. I mean, she wrote Violet, she wrote Shrek, she wrote Thoroughly Modern Millie. And I've heard good things about it. And the Times... Fun Home, right, which is even
great.
More recent. Yeah, tremendously reviewed. And the Times has a special spring preview section. It's one of those times, a Sunday art sections, it doesn't happen all the time, filled with ads. So obviously this is like a big spring season issue. And spring preview, they identify the things that they think that you'll want to see and hear. And on Broadway, the one that jumped out at me is Caroline or Change, which is the story of a boy who grows up in a Jewish neighborhood in the 1960s, and he loses a parent, but he develops a relationship with, the maid, who's a black woman who has her own family, and the musical is supposed to be extremely good. Didn't attract a big following when it was originally opened, but I have a feeling it's going to be great.
Okay, what else?
Well, you have
also in that article, you noticed that they mentioned Assassins.
Oh yes, so Assassins is Yes, so I don't mind talking about this because the Times has identified it as one of these plays to keep an eye on in the spring. And it's a production of the Classic Stage Company, which I've mentioned I'm associated with. So I have a little inside dope on that. So that's Classic Stage. Has a little bit of relationship with Steve Sondheim. Steve Sondheim's turning 90. It's a big celebration on the occasion of his 90th birthday to be doing Assassins. He's granted them the rights to do it. They have a tremendous cast. Assassins being the story, of course, an odd musical, loosely
very odd,
strung together about all the various assassins or would-be assassins of American presidents. But it's a very interesting musical, and it has some big names. I'll just mention one, which is Steve Pasquale playing a main part. And, I've mentioned this to you. I'm not sure. We've seen Steve Pasquale in one musical. Steve Pasquale, who was in Rescue Me, among other things, didn't sing, can really sing. Mm-hmm. Can really sing.
Okay.
And I think that's going to be a fantastic production. It opens April 2nd. I will tell you, again, this little inside scoop, that's a small theater. And that is a limited engagement.
So it's going to be hard to get tickets.
It's going to be hard, without divulging too much. In terms of being able to extend the limited engagement, there might be a little flexibility, but there's not a lot. So if you have interest in that, you ought to get onto that website and watch that website because that's going to be a hard ticket to get.
Or contact somebody you know.
You could.
That's associated with Classic Stage.
You could. That could help you. That could help you.
I'm looking forward to Blue.
Okay.
And that's a play. That's that play that's going to be up at the Apollo. And I think it's opening in April 27th.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, directed by Felicia Rashad. Leslie Uggams is in it. And it's the story of a black middle-class family. And it's kind of interesting. And again, has some music, wonderful singing.
Okay.
So I want to see that. Also, 6.
Yeah, 6. You've been wearing me out with 6. Although I think you're going to go with Sadie. You decided, didn't you? Yeah,
but we've got to decide when to go because it's getting a lot of buzz.
So it'll be running for a long time.
Probably by the time we decide to go, it'll be all sold out.
No.
This is attracting huge. The young people want to see this, Daniel. Mm-hmm, yeah. The young people.
Yes.
And anyway, so...
Well, I did read an article saying it's one of those musicals that is, because the album's been on Spotify for a certain amount of time, there's a whole group of followers already that know the words to all the songs.
Yes.
So they're ready to go.
Yes. Yeah. And it's the story of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And but the backstory of it is even more fun. It's written by 2 people who right now are 25 and 26 years old.
Yeah.
Okay? Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss, when they were students at Cambridge. And just a couple years ago, they, I guess Toby Marlowe, Lucy Moss. Toby got, I guess, assigned or elected to write something as a submission for his theater group at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And so he put this together with Lucy Moss. It's a whole complicated story, in a few minutes, basically. So it was. There's a fun article in the New York Times just kind of detailing the whole process. But it has taken off like wildfire, and I think would be really fun to see. And it's a very much, kind of a contemporary take on these women.
What was this thing about Beyonce that I saw there was a reference to? Did you see that in the Times?
Well, each character, there were a couple different references to Beyonce. First of all, Toby Marlowe looks at Beyonce as one of his mums. As sort of a mother figure.
Don't know what that means, but go ahead.
Well, maybe an inspiration. I don't know.
Okay.
But each of the wives is more or less kind of based in some ways on some pop celebrity.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that explains
so that's the way they've kind of fleshed out their personalities. So it's a combination of historical and kind of hysterical. And it's looks like fun.
Can I ask you this? Have you heard any of the music on the Broadway station or anything else?
You know what? I don't think I have. I heard a long interview.
Yeah.
with the writers a while ago.
Right.
And they were interesting. They were fun. It's possible that during the interview they played some of the music, and I just can't remember it. But, I really am interested. They even have Hans Holbein, the younger, the painter. Did the famous painting. He did a lot of. He was a court painter for Henry VIII. You would recognize his stuff.
Okay.
But anyway, he's one of the characters because they tell a funny story about him painting a portrait of one of the potential wives. So when you're dealing with potential spouses at a distance, it was not uncommon to have an artist do a portrait and bring it to, the king or the prince or whoever. And supposedly, Henry felt, on the basis of that portrait, he was quite attracted to her and was quite disappointed when he saw her in the flesh.
Oh, that's too bad. Hate when that happens.
But, that sort of relates to, don't you think, people's profile images today on social media? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
So that really looks like fun. So there's there's tons more. There's crazy stuff. Mrs. Doubtfire. Oh, I don't know about that. And other, and there's a lot of serious stuff coming out. Death of a Salesman with Nathan Lane and Laurie Metcalf.
Death of a Salesman is a while before.
Okay, what's the other one that Laurie Metcalf?
Slow down. Death of a Salesman is far in the future.
Okay.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is what's coming out with Laurie Metcalf. Slow down.
Okay.
And no one wants to see that. Because that's a rough deal.
Rupert Everett is in it.
I like Rupert Everett. I love Rupert Everett. Okay? In my best friend's wedding. But this is going to be a little bit different for Rupert Everett. Look, that's kind of a dour deal.
Is the Tracy Letts thing, The Minutes?
Yeah, The Minutes, that might be interesting. Well, he wrote August.
Army Hammer's in it?
He wrote, were you a big Army Hammer fan all of a
sudden?
Who
isn't?
Most people, I think, are not. But,
are you kidding me?
My point is about Tracy Letts, he wrote August Osage County. And he's appeared in a lot of things. Most recently, we saw him in Ford versus Ferrari. And this is the first time he's ever appeared on Broadway in a play that he wrote.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting. But anyway, that play, yes.
I find that hard to believe.
It's in the New York Times, so you can't question it.
So a lot of stuff coming down the pike.
Yes, there is a lot of stuff coming down the pike.
More so than movies, I think. I think theater is really exploding in a way.
Well, movies has, this is the age-old thing of movies less serious, less ambitious than they've been in the past because they go increasingly for the youth market. That's the same drill we've been talking about. Someone reminded me again, something that we talked about. Harry, my buddy at work, said to me, I still can't get over the fact that what you guys said on the podcast, that The Graduate was like the number one picture in the country for some time because The Graduate was a serious movie or a semi-serious movie. That kind of movie would never be number one in the country now. Right. It wouldn't be close. Everyone would be complaining why they're giving the Oscar to something that's the 25th in box office. So movies have changed.
And maybe a lot of the, material shows for the small screen.
Yeah,
draining off a lot of great talent.
Yes, that's probably true. But then I guess you come full circle because how many movies now are become the subject of the new musicals on Broadway? So it's back and forth. Mrs. Doubtfire, right? So, all right, let's get to sports because that's what people really want to hear about. The Mets. There's nothing to talk about. Really, the baseball season hasn't started except for one very interesting thing, which is the Met fans who are subtly subversive have found a new way to express their dissatisfaction with the Mets management.
Crazy, right?
Well, they're going
crazy.
They're going crazy.
For
two reasons. One is there's been some frustration for some time for the Mets' unwillingness to spend on free agents or even to keep their own talent. Not that they're terrible, but they're like eighth in spending among the various teams. But of course, they're first in terms of where they're located, in terms of the size of the population. The Yankees are on to that. The Mets haven't figured that out. New York City, very big place. But in any event, so there's no reason for them to be eighth, like behind Milwaukee. That's point one. Point two is, well, they might not be behind Milwaukee, but they're in the neighborhood. And the second is that Met fans were willing to cut them a break because they're about to be sold to Steve Cohen, and that would be a new regime, and now that's been undone.
Right.
So patience is off. So there's an article.
They don't. Do they have a coach now?
Oh yeah, you know that, Luis Rojas. Yeah, they have a manager.
Oh, okay. All right. We talked about that.
Yes, I know.
Okay,
I know.
but
your eyes were...
There were some missteps.
Your eyes were glazed over. But the fact of the matter is...
No, I mean, he has a nice family.
He does, yes. They'll lose.
Okay.
My point is that there's an article in Times about the fact that the Mets are expressing their displeasure with the parsimonious spending habits by sending the general manager of the Mets, Brody Van Wagenen, money on Venmo. There are fans who are actually sending him to his Venmo account, saying, here's $1, here's a few cents, whatever, go sign a free agent.
Right.
And
it's like children sending their pennies to buy, to finance the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
Here's everybody, we're all going to send in a little money so that the Mets can afford to get a better roster.
Yes, right. And it is funny. And it kind of, it's effective because it kind of cuts through the clutter. I mean, what fans are always sending emails that get ignored or Twitter messages or whatever. And they do interview Brody Van Wagenen, and he says, you're right. I mean, the Venmo thing is kind of different. And they said, well, have you spent the Venmo money? He says, the truth of the matter is, I don't know how to access Venmo. I don't know how to use Venmo, which is a little disappointing because he's sort of the his guy they hired who went to Stanford. And he doesn't even know why he has a Venmo account, which he might want to look into because his money might all go away. But in any event, he does find it funny. And thank goodness Brody has a sense of humor. His funniest story about it, he said he does remember in particular somebody sent him money on Venmo in connection with the incident. You may recall last year the Mets had a very bad spell, lost the game because of bad relief pitching, and Brody Van Wagenen went into the manager's office and actually threw a chair and, across the room or something, and it crashed or something like that. And there was a little bit of a dust-up, right? Mm-hmm. The guy sends a Venmo, a fan named Matthew Mackey sends a Venmo message with some money to repair the broken chair, right? And so
those Met fans always ready to help.
Yes. So Van Wagenen said, "Look, let me clarify this. I don't think the chair broke. It may have been a little bit slowed, but it's still on a swivel. So they didn't need that money. But creative. That's the main point. The Mets are creative fans. All right, we had some obituaries this week. You were going to talk about B. Smith, I think.
Yes, B. Smith, model turned restaurateur and lifestyle guru, is dead at 70. So, this is a sad story. She was originally named Barbara Elaine Smith, and here's what they say about her. I think if Martha Stewart and Oprah had a daughter, it would be B. Smith.
Okay.
She
had a wonderful career.
She did. She was a model. She, worked in restaurants, then had her own restaurants. She had a television show.
And B. Smith's
Martha
in New
Stewart
York.
kind of television
But
show giving you
we've been to
home
B.
advice.
Smith's.
We had been to B. Smith's, yeah. And so she really was. I've also heard her called the Black Martha Stewart, and
they
she was, very attractive, very down to earth, and a real personality in that sort of home. I don't know what you would call it.
Home decor, home advice business, whatever you want to call it, lifestyle. I think it's a lifestyle.
Anyway,
thing.
Sadly. I guess about a little over 10 years ago, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Right.
And so she has had a long fight, a long decline. And she was cared for by her husband, Dan Gadsby. And the only thing strange here is that near the end, Dan Gadsby was getting a lot of grief because he had developed a relationship with another woman. And that was just... so he actually made an announcement and said, look, this is my life. This is what I'm doing. And I love my wife, but I can't let her take away my life as well.
She probably couldn't recognize him.
I actually read some stuff at the time. He announced this in 2018. Yeah. And I had read some stuff where he said, look, she doesn't know me. We're basically, I'm caring for her as, almost like caring for an infant. It's just, it's not like she's not there, It's not like I'm cheating on B. Smith. B. Smith is...
Well, what's interesting to me, I didn't know this backstory. You did. So when you read the obituary, it's kind of startling that they say that this is a guy who helped her in terms of restaurants and even television, whatever. They're obviously very close. They show a book cover that they wrote together called Before I Forget, which they look very close, and it's about the Alzheimer's.
Actually, if you look closely, he looks rather grim.
Does he? Yeah.
And she's got
sort of a
this
silly
kind
smile.
of goofy smile,
right?
Almost a childlike smile,
right? No, I didn't see it that way. Yeah, but you're right.
So this caretaking for a person suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever, is just such an exhausting, draining, life-killing
it jumps out at you. They do mention it in the obituary, and you say to yourself, why are they writing about this?
So anyway, sad
couldn't avoid it.
Sad to hear that whole story.
So a fellow named Michael Hertz died. They call him a visual master. Michael Hertz made his name by designing the subway map. Now, we all see the subway map because we all are going someplace in the subway and we're trying to figure out what stop to get to, what train to take. So we've all seen the subway map 1,000 times. And that's the one that he designed. But what's interesting is that some of us...
Daniel, you're so New York-centric.
I am.
Okay? I mean, we have listeners in Columbia. Okay?
The New York City subway map.
Anyway, it's kind of an iconic map and used heavily.
Here's the question about iconic map.
Yes.
This map was developed in 1979. In 1972, or during the period from 1972 to 79, a different map was in use. And that was the one that, frankly, I remember quite well.
Right.
And it was more of, how would you describe it?
You don't have to open up the page. Nobody can see it. Okay,
but you can see it. I want you to see it.
Tell me what you want to say.
The point is, this is in the Museum of Modern Art. The previous map, the one in 1972, and it's stylized. It's not as accurate, slavishly accurate in terms of the geography, but it does communicate a lot of information about where the lines actually go.
So he updated that and made it more to scale, more realistic.
And more detailed.
More user-friendly.
But I love the old subway map.
Yeah, all right. So you're here to talk about how this person did a great thing, he passed away, and you just don't care.
I'm just saying I love the old subway map. But
we don't bring up obits so we can hate on their
I'm not hating him. It was he's well recognized.
You're saying you love the other one.
Okay. Yeah, he's anyway.
Michael Hertz.
He's saluted across the industry, and there is an industry of map makers who all recognize him as the master.
Yeah,
it's considered a great accomplishment
to try to have something that's fairly accurate, but usable at the same time.
I'm giving him his due. And finally, there was an obituary of a fellow named Clive Cussler, which is a colorful name.
You might also call him an author.
Yes.
And deep sea explorer.
Yes, he was all that. So Clive Cussler was an author and deep sea explorer. That's exactly right. Here's what the Times says. Mayan jungles, undersea kingdoms, ghost ships, evil forces out to destroy the world, beautiful women, heroes modeled on himself, Mr. Cussler's vivid literary fantasies, and his larger-than-life exploits swirled together for 4 decades, spinning off more than 85 books and locating almost as many shipwrecks. That's really something. Yeah.
Did he make money off the shipwrecks?
I don't know. Not a whole lot. He actually established a nonprofit organization to manage the shipwrecks and finance the shipwreck investigations. But his books made money. He sold more than 100 million copies, and he amassed a fortune of $80 million. And this guy was, as you mentioned before, he was in advertising. He was an advertising executive.
Right.
And he decided to write these books, which were, they compare them to books by Ian Fleming, the James Bond books, or Tom Clancy, or Robert Ludlum.
Well, they're adventure books. And I heard on the television that when he first wanted to write adventure books, publishers said they don't sell.
Yeah.
And that he had a hard time selling the first one.
Yes, there's a story about how he did it by kind of fooling the agent into thinking he was bigger time than he actually was. but I'm sure, people got comfortable with it because they were such huge sellers. And the best part about this story is that all the stories revolved around a recurring hero named Dirk Pitt. I like that name. And his son was named Dirk, an undersea explorer who cheats death and saves the world as he foils the diabolical plots of megalomaniacal villains while satisfying his taste for exotic cars and lusty women.
Same old, same old.
The same old, same old.
It's always what we're looking for in a guy.
Yeah, well, he wrote this for years, and here's a great quote. He says, when we started out, he's talking about he and his character, Dirk. When we started out, Cussler said, we were both 36 years old. Now he's a little over 40, and I'm pushing 70. Well, it's, you gotta, hats off. What can I say?
That's the good thing about being an imaginary character.
Yes. So there was an article here for those of us who have been in a workplace environment in which we're constantly getting advice about how to give feedback being the thing that's supposedly...
To subordinates?
Yes, to subordinates. All young people or all people moving up the ladder want, which I question, frankly. But in any event, that's what they say. And I work for a large organization, a large law firm, who has brought in consultants and given us tons of advice about how to give feedback. And it never sounded right. And according to the Times' latest article, it's an article by Arianna Huffington, as a matter of fact, in Smarter Living, that kind of thinking is all wrong.
Yeah, so traditionally you're supposed to do the sandwich.
The sandwich, in which the way you give, well, again, assuming you have criticism to provide, which is always the case, honestly. Right. Sandwich, it's positive, negative, positive. You say something nice about the person, you're the greatest at this. Then you say, we'll be a little bit better if you manage to do that better. And then you have another positive, but nobody does this like you. Okay?
Right.
All right. Then we had that for about 5 years. Then after about 5 years, someone came in and said, no, we have a breakthrough. Different organization, different consulting group.
Right.
Said, no sandwich. You just say something positive at the beginning, and then you give the direct negative feedback.
Okay.
It's not a sandwich, or it's an open-faced sandwich.
Okay.
Okay, that was considered groundbreaking. And now they say, no. Not the way to go.
Skip the positive?
Skip the positive completely, because when you say something positive and then negative to someone, they only take away the positive.
Well, I can sort of see
that.
Remember
I
can see that. I can see, listening to it and saying, well, they said I should do this, but, they seem to like what I'm really doing, so forget that.
Yeah, and then the mind works and it retains what it's comfortable retaining.
Yeah, they seem to mostly like me.
So
you just have a few negative things, but mostly I'm doing good, so okay, I'll stick with that.
Give the constructive feedback and let it stand on its own. So there we go, another advancement in workplace dynamics. I just wanted to get that out there because that's important. So finally, you had what I think was a really interesting article about a fellow named William James.
You didn't say you thought it was interesting.
I did after I read it a second time. When I first looked at it, I didn't see it. But when you pointed out to me the virtue of the article, I looked at it again and reconsidered.
Well, this is in the Wall Street Journal by John Kaag, Kaag, and it's entitled William James, Yoga and the Secret of Happiness. And it talks about, this guy talks about in his own life. He was going through some down times, and he actually was reading William James's book, Principles of Psychology, and got some hints about how to handle all this.
And this is a book written like 100 years ago,
well,
right?
Yeah, it was written, that book was actually written in 1890.
Yeah.
Okay. So he was they call him the father of American psychology.
Right.
And he was also a philosopher. He was also the brother of Henry James,
yeah,
the author. Okay. And what this guy decides is that according to William James's advice, yoga can solve all your problems.
Right.
Okay? I know that you had a few quotes from this that you like it. Basically what it comes down to is that William James says, we don't laugh because we're happy. We're happy because we laugh.
Yes, and that I found indecipherable.
Right.
But what I found the broader principle, and frankly I also found the guy's discussion of yoga pretty not interesting, but the broader principle, which is in the article, is that you have to lift yourself from your lethargy. And if you do that by physical activity, it changes the framework of everything you're doing. And in fact, that activity governs your mental state.
Right. So he says, smooth your brow, brighten your eye. This is William James. Contract the dorsal rather than the ventral aspect of the frame. In other words, sit up straight.
Yeah.
Okay. And your heart must be frigid indeed, if not to generally thaw. Okay. And the author says here, he's telling us to act differently. Do something.
Right.
Even if it's the last thing we want to
right.
do.
Right. If you do something, if you take a walk, if you do something physical, if you challenge yourself, even if it doesn't seem appealing, by using those actual physical muscles, you do actually change the way you think, which seems questionable. But I think it's right. And of course, the author's experience was that they were entirely right. This is a guy who's suffering from a second divorce and a second heart attack. And he finds the physical activity just changes his frame of mind so completely.
So it's not just about physical training, it's about emotional training.
Yes.
And one of his bits of advice,
Well, this is my favorite bit of advice. This will tell you more about me than anything else.
This is from William James.
All right. And so,
100 years ago.
The question is, how do you get yourself to do this? And here's the quote from James. Everybody should do at least 2 things each day that he hates to do just for practice.
Well, there's getting up.
I mean, I love that quote.
Yeah.
I mean, words to live by.
Okay.
And what did you like?
As James knew, actions do not always bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action.
That's right. So get up off the couch. That's what this says, and do something. All right. So that's all we have this week. And this first day of March, this beautiful day in March. And
looking forward to many more adventures.
So this is Dan Abuhoff.
And Tamsen Granger with Dan and Tamsen, or Tamsen and Dan, somebody reading the paper. See you next week.
Thanks.